Hi everyone, and welcome to the Spring 2013 Final Exam Review. What we'll be looking at in this short video is the basic structure of the exam, the topics that are covered in the exam, which include employee benefits, which is a theory question, foreign currency, which is a practical question, financial instruments, which is a practical question, leases, which is a theory question, tax, which is a practical question, cash flows, which is also a practical question, incentives, which is a theory question and based very much on the early work we did in this semester, and ethics, which is also a theory question. We'll also look at some general tips we've got for the exam based on our experience and some feedback we received from students. And then lastly, what support and resources we provide between now and your exam next week. So turning to the structure first. The exam, as you're well aware, is on November the 20th at 6 p.m. So it is a late finishing exam. That is the Wednesday, and it is down at Wentworth Park. It is 3 hours and 10 minutes long. It is restricted open book, which means you can take a copy of the standards in with you. These are to have no writing in them, although you can have tabs, highlighting, underlining, all those sort of things. So as I said, no writing and tabs are allowed. It is 60% practical and 40% theory. So the theory questions, you do not have to pull out a calculator for them. It is purely written in those. Now to begin with, just having a look at some of the underlying concepts which are important for the theory questions more generally. So the things that you need to keep in mind are the uses of accounting. We discussed these in the early weeks of the semester, and we focused primarily on the contracting uses of accounting and the decision-making uses of accounting. So with those, you should have a good idea of what the background to those uses are. Turning to the agency cost of debt and the agency cost of equity. The other thing also to bear in mind, and this does play into the incentives question as well, is this idea of efficiency in accounting choices versus opportunism in accounting choices. So the idea with efficiency is that management, in as much as they can, are telling you what is actually going on within the business. The numbers which come out in terms of the financial reports are, in a way, as much as the truth as they can be. Whereas with an opportunistic accounting choice, management are telling you more what they would like to be telling you, and portraying the company in a particular way. And obviously there are reasons for that. Now this isn't to say that every company does this. I mean, it does happen, but I wouldn't say it is exactly widespread. When we talk about the location of the numbers, and this is probably not the most correct term for this sort of thing, but when I talk about the location of the numbers, the sort of things that I'm getting at here are whether the information is provided in the financial statements themselves. So is this number recognized, or is it in the notes? So these numbers aren't recognized, but rather provided as a note disclosure. So probably the thing I'm thinking of there is around operating leases. Some of these numbers are not recognized in the financial statements. You do not see a lease liability or a lease asset in relation to operating leases, but some of this information is provided in the notes depending on the type of operating lease, and it is possible to actually calculate some of these liability figures yourselves. Does that make a difference? I suppose is what I'm getting at there. Location of the numbers, does something feed through profit and then into equity, or does it bypass profit and just jump straight into OCI? In both cases, they have an impact on the underlying wealth of the equity holders, but OCI does not come through the profit figures. So does that make a difference? And finally, current versus non-current. Does it matter if an asset is classified current or non-current? Does it matter if a liability is classified current or non-current? The framework, you should have a reasonably good understanding of the framework. So looking at the qualitative characteristics, as well as the various element definitions and recognition criteria as discussed within the framework, remembering that the framework isn't necessarily what you see in the standards. Hopefully there is a consistency there, but there are going to be times, and for quite legitimate reasons, where the standards do not necessarily match up with the framework itself. Turning to incentives, the easiest way to think about these, and this is something to make sure that you're on top of before walking into the exam, is for the main elements. So thinking revenue and expenses, which obviously feed into profit, for assets, and also for liabilities. What incentives are there for management to want to show a higher number within each of these elements, and also quite possibly to show a lower number? So could it be based on management having a compensation plan with bonus targets involved? How does that impact the asset level that they show? Are there reasons why that could have an impact? So in each case, with possibly the exception of liabilities, where I'm not too sure if there are any incentives to increase liabilities, but I may be wrong with this. But you should have an idea of one or two reasons why management would want to increase or decrease each of those elements. So for profit, for assets, and for liabilities, you should have a couple of ideas for each of them as to why that would exist. And when you're coming up with these ideas, think back to the decision-making uses of accounting and the contracting uses of accounting. Turning more to the theory questions. So this is more in relation to the specific theory questions that we have in there. So things that you should be able to do is understand the key aspects of the standard. So what are the requirements? So things like the definitions, what are the initial recognition and measurement requirements within that standard for that particular phenomena. So I think leases and employee benefits. So what are the initial recognition criteria and how are those things measured? Then how are they subsequently measured, and any disclosure requirements around them. So tying into what we saw in the previous slide, what choices are available to management? Why would they go down a particular path? And to be able to figure out what choices are available, you need to know what the key aspects of the standard are. So with leases, what are the differences between finance and operating leases, and how does this affect the numbers? And then linking to the incentives, why might management make those choices? So why would they potentially choose operating over financing, for example? In terms of the ethical question, what's going to happen in the exam is you're going to be presented with a scenario. Now with this scenario, some things to consider are, what are the issues involved? Who is involved? What is the position that you would take in relation to that particular scenario, given the role that you are deemed to play? Why would you take that position? And would full disclosure affect your position? So if your decision was held up to the full light of day, do you think that would actually affect how you would do things if you could make your decision in private and no one need know about it? Now, to have a look at some of these things, if you go to www.ethics.org.au/content/ethical-dilemmas, there are a number of different ethical dilemmas which may be worth having a look at. Now, you probably only need to look at 2 or 3 just to get a sense of how to work through this. Turning to the practical section, foreign currency is one of the topics, and you need to have an awareness of foreign currency transactions, monetary items, and how non-monetary items get dealt with. Also looking at foreign currency translations, so where you have, for example, a subsidiary and you need to consolidate that subsidiary. If that subsidiary is based in New Zealand and you're an Australian based company, then you're going to have to translate the New Zealand dollar statements into Australian dollar statements. With financial instruments, we looked at debt instruments, so just a straight debt instrument like what we did in the lecture demonstration, and we looked at it both in a fair value and historic cost method. Convertible instruments, which we didn't look explicitly in the lecture, but these were included in the tutorial work, both fair value and historic cost. Be aware of how these work. And hedge accounting. So how hedge accounting works, how to account for derivatives, forwards. I haven't got it explicitly there, but futures as well. Forwards and futures, for our point of view, are very similar in how they operate, as well as options. Now, options are actually a little bit easier to deal with from our point of view than forwards and futures, because the value of the option will be provided for you. The difficulty with forwards and futures is we may get you, if this is in the sort of question that we have, get you to calculate the fair value of these at each of the relevant dates. Or it could be a combination question involved, which is looking at a foreign currency transaction with a hedge. And there was plenty of practice of this. One of the lecture demonstrations went through this, so you need to have a good awareness. And of the different types of hedges, whether it be a cash flow hedge, whether it be a fair value hedge. Tax is another area for practical consideration, and with tax you need to be able to calculate out taxable income, calculate current tax payable, calculate the tax base of assets and liabilities, calculate temporary differences, and calculate the DTAs and DTLs which come from those temporary differences, and to account for any DTAs, DTLs, or tax payables which you have. Once you've determined the tax payable, the first step, calculating the current tax payable, is straightforward, which is only taking the tax rate, multiplying that by the taxable income. With the next three steps, calculating the tax base of assets and liabilities is the difficult one. Once you've got that, the temporary differences will literally be the difference between the tax base and the carrying value. So the temporary differences are easy. The DTA or DTL just is having an understanding of whether that temporary difference is assessable or deductible. So you should be aware of how to do that. Turning to cash flows, which we only did very recently, and the lecture demonstration question was a pretty comprehensive example of working through an entire cash flow statement. So you need to be able to calculate the operating cash flows, financing cash flows, and investing cash flows. It could be that you get a situation where you have to do all three. It could be that you have to do one segment of it, so just the operating, or just the financing, or just the investing, or potentially two of them. It depends on how many marks have been allocated to that question. Turning now to general tips. First one, it's a cliche, read the question. Second one, probably even more of a cliche, but answer the question. So don't answer what you think the question was, answer what the actual question itself was. It's really frustrating when we see people write pretty good answers to a completely different question. Read the question, figure out what the requirements are, and answer that particular question. Keep an eye on your time. These three general exam tips, not just for what we're doing. The questions are of different value. Work out how long you've got to allocate to each question and try to keep to that as much as you can. If you do better, if you get ahead of time, designate some of that for either checking over what you've done or to harder questions. You need to know how to calculate present values. We will provide present value tables in the exam, but if you want to use a financial calculator or formula, please feel free to do that. But we do provide the present value tables in the exam questions. Practical, you may not get allocated specific marks to it, but please show you're working. It makes it less likely that you will make a mistake, and if you do make a mistake, it gives us an easier position to work through and figure out how significant your error was. It's just good practice to put that in. With theory, don't just charge straight at it. Spend a moment, plan your response. In terms of the questions, if it's relevant, answer up front. Provide the answer what it is, and then provide detail following that. That way the markers have a good idea what's going on and then can follow your logic through. A big no-no, don't copy large amounts from the standards. That tells us absolutely nothing, and the point of the exam is for us to get an understanding of how well you've understood and synthesized what you've picked up over the last 3 or 4 months. Simply copying out a page from the standards tells us nothing other than you can open up the standards and can copy stuff out from it. It wastes your time, it's not beneficial for you, don't do it. Practice. I realize that you have other exams on, so time may be constrained. Now the big issue that we see with this is not so much around the practical questions, because when you actually practice, when you actually are preparing for this, you are generally sitting down with your calculator or whatever you need and working through the questions, actually punching in the numbers and writing it out and working it out that way. With the theory questions, this doesn't happen so much. It may just be that you read the questions, have a sense of it, look over some of your notes, maybe jot down a few points. Practice writing out full exam style answers for theory questions as well. Often when we talk to people after the exam and go through their papers, it's really frustrating from our point of view, and obviously from their point of view as well. They've understood the question and they actually have a reasonable understanding of what's going on. We can talk about it, they get it, but that doesn't get communicated properly in their response. And so with that, practice, that's what's going to help. Now lastly, in terms of support and resources, if you happen to get sick, something goes wrong, if work comes up, whatever, as soon as you know something's gone on, talk to us. Send either myself or Rob, send us an email, call us on the phone, although depending on where we are, we may not answer it straight away, but send us an email, find out, and we can give you options. The sooner you talk to us, the better. If it's after the exam, it's getting a little bit late. If it's after final results have come out, it's getting far too late. Talk to us early. If there is a problem, www.sau.uts.edu.au. There are forms for special consideration. So this is when something has happened, you've been able to sit the exam, but something has happened and you want us to take that into consideration. These are due within 1 or 2 working days, so you need to get this in pretty quickly. If you miss the exam, you need to apply for a special exam, and if that's the situation, you need to put this in within 1 or 2 days, and they as when I mean they, I mean exams, they'll determine whether or not you get another exam. Now, if you do get another exam, in terms of the exact questions which go into this, the exact weighting, practical theory, all those sort of things, those are not as what we've just talked about. If you do get a special exam, please talk to us and we can advise. Now, there are plenty of resources between now and next week. There are the drop-ins. There are 2 drop-ins this Friday, one at 10:30, one at 2:30, and there are also drop-ins on Monday, one at 10:30, one at 2:30. So if you've got questions and you would like to speak to us in person, please come along to them. There are consults. I am generally around the office, so if you can find me, I'm happy to talk. Otherwise, send me an email and we can fix up a time which is best for both of us. There's a discussion board. We will be monitoring that daily, so if you have a question and for whatever reason you don't particularly want to see me or Rob, we won't take offense to that, but if you have a question, please throw it up on the discussion board and we will get to it. If you are seeing a question on the discussion board which you know the answer to, feel free to answer that. We will keep an eye on things. If you're on track, we'll leave it as is. If we think there's some clarification needed, we will provide that. Lastly, there are also quite a number of multimedia resources. There are screencasts up on UTS Online which are on a range of topics, including hedging, which are useful to have a look at. There are also a range of videos on YouTube, including this one, but all the lectures from week 7 on are included up there, as well as a number of other resources. So there are a significant number of things up there, so please make use of them. The thing you shouldn't do is be walking into that exam knowing that you're unsure about something. If you're unsure about something, ask us, and we will try as best as we can to help find a solution for that. Other than that, good luck for next week and all the rest of your exams.